Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your Libertarian car guy, and I thought I'd do a quick little video about changing oil. It's getting to be spring. That's one of those things that people tend to do in spring. I know I like to service my vehicles when it's warm rather than cold. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about today is how changing oil has become a little bit more challenging than it used to be back when I was a kid in the 80s. One of the things that's changed is that cars, particularly sedans like this 2018 Accord, tend to sit a lot lower than the cars did in the past, and that can make it a challenge both to get it on a ramp or to get it on jacks. Ramps, forget about it, and if you look at the car you'll see why. There is not much room between the surface of the pad here and the fascia. That's the rubber front bumper cover of the car, and if you try to drive on ramps, generally what happens is that the front end of the car will kind of push the ramp out, and even if you can do that, it's fraught with peril because these plastic fascias are very, very vulnerable to damage. They're very fragile, and if anything gets hung up, you can easily tear that very, very expensive fascia. You don't want to do that. I've pretty much given up on ramps for late model vehicles for just that reason. Another problem is that they are so low slung. Sometimes it's hard to get a standard floor jack underneath the car, in which case you might want to look at, just to give you a little helpful tip here, get a low profile jack. The one that's closest to me with the yellow sticker on it, as you can see, the pad sits about 2 inches lower than the standard type jack, and that makes it a lot easier to get it underneath the car to a jacking point. Also, be very, very sure of your jacking point before you start to jack the car up. If you don't, and you start to jack, say, the floor pans or some other point that's not designed to handle the weight of the car, you can very easily cause some pretty expensive damage to your vehicle, and you don't want to do that over a $40 oil change. Something else that has changed, and if you've been underneath a late model car recently, you probably already know about this. Many late model cars have plastic pans that are put underneath the entirety of the engine, and the main reason for that is airflow. With all the pressure coming from Washington to squeeze as many miles per gallon out of a car as possible, the manufacturers are putting these plastic pads underneath the engine to smooth out the airflow. Also, it helps to tamp down noise, and that's one of the things that they use to increase the quiet or decrease the sound coming into the passenger cabin. At any rate, the difficulty is getting those pans off and back on, particularly for the do-it-yourselfer who hasn't got access to a hoist, and so you're not walking around underneath the vehicle. When you're on your back with the car just a few inches up in the air, it can be a real pain to take that thing off and then put it back on correctly. And you really want to make sure you do put it back on correctly. If it's misaligned, it can rub up against a fan belt, or it could even come off while you're driving, and you definitely don't want that. Ideally, get a helper to hold it for you while you put it back in place, or you can even use a jack to just jack it up and hold it in the general position, so you can maneuver it and get all the holes lined up and get it put on correctly. Final observation to make is that unlike back in the day when almost any off-the-shelf oil would be okay, you're not going to hurt anything unless it was Wesson oil. With modern vehicles, late model vehicles, pretty much anything actually made since the 90s, but especially anything that's been made within the last several years, very, very important to use exactly the type of oil that's specified by the manufacturer. So if they tell you to use synthetic rather than standard mineral-based oil, use the synthetic. Use the right viscosity. Don't use a different viscosity. Make sure it meets all the API service recommendations, which you will find in the owner's manual for the vehicle. If you don't do that, you can have expensive mechanical problems which will not be covered by the manufacturer's warranty. So don't do that. It's just not worth it. Buy the right oil for your vehicle and do the job correctly. Anyway, I'm going to have an article about this up at epautos.com, the net's most entertaining libertarian car site. Hope you'll come by and take a look, and thanks for viewing, and we'll catch up with you again soon.